Hi, and welcome back to Self Careapist Therapist, a podcast for therapists, psychologists, social workers, and other interested parties. I'm host Lorraine Moorhead, a therapist myself and therapy consultant. Today's episode is all about how community prevents therapist burnout along with self-care routines. Please subscribe and rate wherever you get your podcasts. And if you enjoy this episode, do consider sending it to a friend or colleague who would also appreciate it. That helps this podcast continue to reach our engaged community, which consequently is right in line with today's topic. Therapist community, along with professional support, are doing something individualized self-care alone doesn't always. If you're a solo practitioner feeling isolated, or a clinician who's been curious about peer consultation groups or masterminds, this episode is going to give you the research to support that curiosity, the roadmap to engage in it. Today, we're looking at all the research behind this wellness strategy and what it looks like to build the kind of therapist community that promotes well-being, including what I've been trying to build here in Arizona. Be sure to stay to the end because I'll show you how you can get connected, whether you're local or not. There was a time shortly after I graduated from graduate school. It was actually after my first post-grad job that I found this large community behavioral health agency, and I decided to interview with them. As I was sitting in the lobby and looking around, I saw the people who would come to be my colleagues and friends over the years coming into the lobby to call their clients to join them in session. And I was looking around thinking, oh, she looks like she'll be my friend. I made eye contact with a friend that I had from graduate school who I hadn't spoken to in a while, but she came in to grab her client, and I just felt like this was going to be just a great setting for me. And it absolutely was. I think back on these times so fondly, which is probably a wild thing to say. And young me would probably contest this statement because the work was so hard and the caseloads were so large and there was so much documentation. Yet this was probably one of the eras of my career that I look back on most fondly. And there are a few reasons for this and a few things that we all did to make this possible. Number one, every Wednesday, the agency had a team meeting. And before this team meeting, it was kind of like an unspoken rule that we would all go to this long lunch together. And whether this long lunch was sanctioned or not, I don't exactly know, but everybody knew that we were doing it. So we would start talking about which restaurant we were going to earlier in the day, if not earlier in the week. And we would have this boisterous lunch where we all caught up on everything that was going on. We would get feedback about different situations that might have been happening at the office, and we would be pretty much refreshed by the time we made it back for team meeting. After this office, a lot of us started to go our separate ways because we had been pursuing independent licensure, and as we all got it, people started to do different things. I ended up working after this in a different state in one of the most solo offices and jobs that I've had to this point. And I really longed for that community. So when I came back to Arizona, I was able to join 3 of these ladies from this previous office in a small office where we all worked together again. And this was a private practice. So, a night or two a week after all the clients were gone, we would lock the doors. And if our schedules lined up, we would get to have a little team meeting in one of our offices where we would all kick back. And I remember this feeling of lightness, just like floating out of the office, because anything that had been on my mind, anything that had been stressful to me, we got to leave it in the office that night after communing with our good friends at the end of the day. And this leads me to the opposite, which is a moment that I know most therapists might recognize. You close your door after a session that feels genuinely hard and there's no one in the hallway to process it with. And if you're in private practice, that might be every night. Or if you work virtually, this could be every night that you're logging off thinking like, okay, time to try and leave it all here, but you still have things on your mind. And we've been told that self-care is the answer to that specific kind of depletion. And I really believe that it is. However, the research here suggests that solo self-care isn't always what we want to be doing. And there is some real evidence that forming a community can be helpful as well. And self-care and community aren't competing ideas. I know we talk about it a lot now as if they are. Like, oh no, I have to go home and do my self-care. I can't meet up with friends, or I can't schedule anything after work or on a busy day because I'm already going to be pretty drained. But the two things are working on different areas. And we're going to look today at what community adds to a self-care routine and what exactly it takes to build that deliberately. Self-care practices address symptoms of burnout and prevent symptoms of burnout, but they don't always touch on the structural and relational conditions that create burnout. Self-care and professional community are both necessary and sometimes are two sides of the same coin. What I think is missing from most therapist wellness conversations is the distinction between self-care as symptom management and community as a structural protective factor. If we only ever do one of them, we're leaving a significant part of the necessary intervention out of our routine. And here's what the research tells us about why. A large study of over 1,000 health professionals, I'll link all of these in the show notes, found that social support significantly mediated the relationship between all three dimensions of burnout, which are emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and reduced personal accomplishment, and general health. Emotional exhaustion showed the strongest effect. Higher burnout predicted lower perceived support. So the higher amount of burnout that you are experiencing means that you're perceiving less support around you. So if the inverse of that would be that less burnout might indicate higher perceived support. And when you have higher predicted support, you have fewer health problems also, which makes that finding particularly important because of the direction of the relationship. Burnout depletes the social support that would otherwise protect against it. So it's a really cyclical relationship. The longer a therapist goes without professional community, the less capacity they have to build it. That right there is a cycle worth interrupting. I mentioned earlier, I was talking about my second community mental health job out of graduate school, but I also remember going into the first one. And I will probably talk about this one a lot just because I think it's important for new clinicians listening to have a bit of validation in whatever they're experiencing as they leave grad school. But my experience leaving grad school was really challenging also. I'm a social worker. A group of women that I met during grad school who I'm still close friends with to this day. And again, I feel like lunch is my main thesis of today's episode. Group lunch, friends. That's the takeaway, is we would have lunch 2 days a week when we were all on campus. And I remember I didn't really notice it at the time. What I noticed at the time was that it was fun and we really looked forward to it. And again, we would decide where we were going to go for lunch really early in the day or the week. But it gave something to look forward to. And again, we would connect during those lunches. And it was so neat to have validation, shared experience, and connection with this group of social workers. And as I was saying, I didn't really notice it at the time, but I noticed it once I left graduate school and started my job, that I was so in need of that connection. Some of you might be nodding along right now, but there's nothing like it. And I really felt like a need to adjust after I left and went into the real world because I just wasn't feeling heard in the same way. So I feel like you can start to get used to not having social support, and then you're feeling less able to access it. We have a really neat episode coming up on radically open DBT, and the speaker and the guest has a really nice way of putting it into language that we start to do certain things when we perceive ourselves as not having social support that in turn allows us to access less social support. So this same study that I mentioned earlier found that social support accounted for more than a quarter of the variance in anxiety and social dysfunction symptoms. So connection isn't a supplement to burnout intervention. It's a primary need through which burnout translates into distress and through which distress can be buffered. Research with integrative psychotherapists identifies that peer interaction, clinical supervision, and personal therapy are also central buffers against burnout. Therapists explicitly in this study describe peer contact and social groups as crucial for shared learning, emotional support, and reducing isolation. And a practice article in Professional Psychology frames peer consultation specifically as an enriching necessity, not optional enrichment, but a necessary structural component of a sustainable practice. So how I've seen this and integrated it is that initially just the way the work happens in the work that I do to support a local agency with their intern supervision. Interns come in and oftentimes they have full-time jobs. They have different school schedules. So the hours that they want to do their internship can be wildly varied. Some have daytime hours available if they're full-time students, and some are working a full-time job and are really looking for a role that can accommodate the after 5 p.m. shift. And so initially, as interns were coming on, they were pretty isolated. But in answer to this necessity, I've been trying to, and all of us have been trying to work together to give the interns opportunities a few times a week to be all together in working the same shift, so they have that opportunity to just blow off steam, ask questions, study for their licensure exams, study for their finals if that's what they're doing, just connect on that level. And of course, I have my graduate school friends still. So in this world of online graduate school, which wasn't simply an option the way that it is now when I was graduating in 2008, I know that I've always had a group chat to ask questions to follow up on things with, to just have some support if I needed it. And I try to facilitate that with interns and supervisees as well. The intervention research backs up this need that I'm describing directly because reviews of burnout interventions for counselors and related helping professionals consistently identify clinical supervision, again, peer supervision and consultation, workplace social support, and improved communication as core components of effective burnout reduction programs. Organization-directed interventions that combine skills training with enhanced social supports. So things like better communication structures, better support systems for peers show positive effects on burnout outcomes in counseling and other helping roles. The takeaway here is that when you build community into the structure of how you practice, it moves the needle in ways that individual efforts alone may not. We can teach vicarious trauma reduction. We can teach burnout identification. All of those are super important. And baking in opportunities for community into the workplace can be so important. So even for those of us who, for whatever reason, have chosen to work in a more solo or at times isolating office or isolating role, I'm hoping that it's piquing your interest right now on how to organize that needed connection. This is something that I started to really understand clearly during COVID when peer contact got disrupted. I felt it, but it had not even just me. I think all of us experienced such an onslaught of clients who were identifying all kinds of things: anxiety, depression, burnout, all kinds of things. And it often didn't feel like it was directly because they weren't able to access the same kind of support. I think the extroverts among us could possibly felt able to put their finger on it. But for a lot of folks, they just noticed the symptoms without necessarily being able to directly identify that limited community and lack of peer support were contributing. Some of the things that I had taken for granted personally, like debriefing after a hard case, running into a colleague, turned out to be doing more protective work alongside everything else I was doing for my own wellness than I had realized. And the research validates exactly this experience. Peer consultation specifically helps clinicians detect burnout early using validated tools like the Moslock Burnout Inventory, which I'll link below, and provides a safe space to process things like countertransference, ethical worries, and feelings of ineffectiveness, the kinds of things that accumulate quietly in solo practice and rarely get named without a dedicated space to name them. I'm saying solo practice, but you can feel like you're in a solo practice silo, even if you work around a ton of people, because community building is often an intentional practice. Even if you're working in a room full of other clinicians, you have to leave your office, go in, sit in another person's office, chat with them. Sometimes it can feel like, oh, I'll just knock out these 5 sessions and then go home. But even if you're working among a lot of colleagues, and even if you see them at meetings and stuff at work, it really is an intentional connection practice to be able to get to the level where there's a mutual exchange of peer consultation, encouragement, ideas, and so forth. There's something worth noting from the DBT model here as well. In episode 2, Dr. Kiki Failing and I talked about this. Consultation teams are built directly into comprehensive DBT as a required structural component, not optional, but required. And the idea is that therapists are doing hard work and they need a community of peers doing that same work alongside them. And it's baked into the model from the start. Another interesting element of that model is that there isn't really a facilitator. So even the seasoned clinicians in those DBT consultation groups are also sharing their cases, are also looking for feedback, are also open to receiving an idea or encouragement, more directive feedback. There's no like formal director or facilitator or hierarchy in that model. DBT really shows us, though, how seriously the peer consultation model can be taken. It can be easily required or like baked into any setting that we're working in. It's just that sometimes other values or other priorities are seen as more critical, and we don't add extra time for things that can be in some ways so valuable. So I want to introduce a framework here that I think gives language to what a lot of us are already trying to build, and that's Etienne Wenger's communities of practice model. Wenger defines communities of practice as groups of people who share a concern or passion and learn how to do it better through regular interaction. The core elements here are a shared domain or a common area of concern, and an active community of people who regularly interact and build relationships around that domain, and a shared practice or the accumulated knowledge, tools, stories, and approaches that the community develops over time. A review of communities of practice in healthcare found that they supported learning, informational sharing, problem solving, and practice improvement across a wide range of forms, which range from informal or voluntary to structured multi-site project teams. And the form varied, but the mechanism was consistent. And that is that the framework gives us a way to think about therapist peer groups as their learning organisms. The shared domain is clinical excellence and therapist wellness. And I resonate with this because my desire to work on this podcast and talk to all of you is similar. A desire for clinical excellence, but also the connection that comes out of it and hopefully continues to come from it. The practice is the ongoing work of doing this well across a career. And that framing elevates what a meetup or consultation group actually is. Yes, it is a nice gathering, but it's also a structure for professional growth, a structure for referrals and really getting to know the people that you're working alongside in the community and brainstorming how to make improvements on all of these aspects. So as I was saying earlier, sometimes it feels like we have to give up our personal self-care practices to engage socially. And I think even for those of us whose social needs are relatively low, there's still such a value in having a consultation group or consultation opportunities with your colleagues. The one value is, of course, skills transfer. Sometimes I just love hearing from people what they're using, what they're reading, what they're doing. You hear about a book and you're like, I wouldn't have even realized that was out there if this person hadn't mentioned and endorsed it. So I love to get a great referral for something that I haven't heard of yet and would love. But it's also the ongoing creation of shared professional language, shared stories, and shared tools that reinforce identity and deepen practice. When you're part of a community that takes your work seriously, you take your work more seriously. But when you're part of a community that takes the work seriously and really enjoys it, it's easy to adapt and start to do the same. One of the things that gets the least attention in therapist burnout conversations is professional identity. And I think it's actually a super important element to talk about. A recent 2025 study on medical staff found that professional identity and workplace social capital mediate the relationship between leadership and burnout. So a stronger professional identity is directly associated with lower burnout. And social identity theory explains why this works. When you define yourself through a valued professional group role, you build resilience, more positive attitudes toward your work, and greater resistance to stress. Being able to be a member of a group where you're really excited about the work, you're able to maybe focus in on the things that make the work exciting, good. You may be able to tap into some of your values, and that can be protective against stress because you're able to focus on more of the positives. For listeners right now in private practice especially, it's worth sitting with. Solo practice can quietly erode professional identity over a time in a way that's hard to name. You stop having colleagues who reflect back that you're doing a great job and your skills are undeniable. You lose the informal affirmations that come from working alongside people and just the overall positive feelings that you get from being able to share something with a colleague or maybe pass along something that you've garnered from some research that you've been doing. Self-care helps you recover, but community helps you stay anchor, and both are doing necessary work on different parts of the same system. Community membership reinforces I'm a competent, valued member of this profession and is protective against the identity erosion that underlies chronic burnout. A review in this literature concluded that professional identity development programs can help prevent burnout that arises from emotional stress. Your sense of who you are as a therapist is a wellness variable, and it's one that requires tending alongside everything else that you're doing for your own well-being. So let's talk about therapist masterminds specifically, because I think that this is a underutilized structure because the therapist professional doesn't always lean toward language or mindset around being a mastermind. And it can pair powerfully even in individual self-care practices. The concept of masterminds is grounded in well-validated mechanisms from leadership and professional development research, even if you don't see them that often among therapists. They're structured as peer learning and accountability communities, and they often contain regular meetings, shared goals, hot seat problem solving, and which might look like one person bringing a challenge and the group engaging with it. Sometimes this is rapid fire where you're listing off a lot of different opportunities that could help with the problem. And sometimes it is slower paced and a timer can be utilized. And there are usually, especially in our field where confidentiality is so important, there can be some pretty stringent norms around attendance and confidentiality. Leaders in peer networks show more innovation, collaboration, and strategic clarity, and the benefits map directly onto what therapists need from professional support, which is a fresh perspective on clinical challenges, accountability around their own growth goals, and the experience of being genuinely known professionally over time. So this is the type of validation and reinforcement that I've been kind of stringing through this entire episode, because I've noticed moments throughout my professional career where I definitely had that. And they say that a lot of friendships last about 7 years because some of the factors that allow the friendships change over time. You leave jobs, you move states, you might not be going to the same class or playing on the same league that you're playing on when you became friends with the person. But I am happy to say that all of the friends that I've mentioned throughout this episode, I'm still friends with, even if I don't have a natural opportunity to have them, see them throughout the day, to see them in casual run-ins in the hallways. What a mastermind really is a community of practice with structure and stakes. You're not just connecting, you are able to identify, similar to our clients, your own goals and the interventions that you want to use to get there, while having a group to hold you accountable and make suggestions from their own experiences as well. And I wanted to also share something personal here, that a lot of this has contributed to the reason why I wanted to start the therapist movement meetups in my local area with therapists. So when I look at Wenger's framework that highlights shared domain, active community, shared practice, I recognize that was what I was really responding to when I started not only the podcast, but the meetups, that being able to come together and do something active that we might want to do with our time anyway might give an opportunity for people who want to prioritize solo self-care and don't want to miss out on the time they have allocated for that, but also have had sort of a calling to connect more with their local therapist community, learn from them, but also learn about them, and just be sort of in sync with what we're all doing here. And once I put this idea out there, there's been a lot of resonance in the community about people who are excited to do it. So we've had one meetup so far, and hopefully it's something that will continue even as though it continues to heat up and we can't do as much outside activity safely. And I was really thinking about creating that opportunity to combine the two things. Besides lunch is one of the main thesis statements of this episode today. There's something about being in a community with people who are in the same season of work and understand the specific elements of it that adds a dimension that other practices can't provide. The infrastructure matters as much as when it's formal or informal, and knowing there's a colleague you can reach out to after a hard session, having a recurring event that keeps the connection alive and you can depend on happening on a fairly frequent schedule can go a long way. So if you're in Arizona and you want to be part of what we're building, The details will be in the show notes. And if you're not local, stay with me because what I'm describing next is for you. So beyond the meetup, the next layer of professional support being built is going to be structured clinical consultations. So I'm looking to do a more formalized space for us to really grow our clinical skills and for people working with specific populations to be able to meet with their peers, have a confidential support network that's beyond clinical supervision, or maybe even clinical supervision has stopped and you still want an opportunity to deep dive some of these modalities that you're interested in. So if any of this resonates, make sure to sign up for my newsletter. And also, I'm also hoping to build more of a community with the podcast as well. So at any point, you can head to lorrainemoorhead.com/podcast. My email address and contact information is there. I'm always open to hearing feedback. What do you want to hear more of? What do you want to hear less of? What would make this a non-negotiable listen for you? I'm always eager and open to hearing feedback because I just want to create a resource that is not only helpful to clinical growth, but also community growth. So please be sure to reach out, get on the list, send me feedback. Let me know what you'd be looking for in a mastermind or a peer consultation group or a local meetup event. And here's what I want you to take from today. Self-care and professional communities specifically are not in competition. They're working on different dimensions of the same problem. The research is consistent. Social support significantly mediates the impact of burnout on your health across all three burnout dimensions. And the interventions that actually move the needle on burnout for helping professionals are the ones that combine skills and self-care with enhanced professional support and structured peer spaces. Start thinking about social support and professional belonging as key buffers in your own burnout formulation, alongside workload autonomy and values alignment. And this idea belongs in your wellness plan, even if it feels like a lot of work or like it may be outside of your comfort zone to connect safely with your peers. So please feel free to reach out. Let me know what you're looking for in future episodes, what I could do better with, and I'll catch you in the next episode.